So just to give you guys a little bit more of an introduction, a lot of the poems I'm going to be reading tonight, to give you some background information, are about my family. My dad in particular, about 3 years ago, was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia. So what that does is basically erodes a person's frontal lobe slowly over time. So as a teenager, I thought that he was much weirder than all the other parents, much more embarrassing. And after that diagnosis, I had proof. I was absolutely right that he was and did in fact have a brain disease. So, laugh and cry, right? So a lot of these poems are for him. I'm going to start out with Boom. I've got nothing to tell you but this. 2 days ago, my father's house almost exploded from a ruptured firebox in the furnace. I wouldn't have caught it, except the heat wouldn't stop cranking. The thing just wouldn't shut off, so I figured I'd better call somebody. It was all getting too hot. Even with the doors swung open wide, the January sky was opening too. The furnace continued to whir its complaints in a dialect I couldn't understand. When the technician arrived, she said we'd been lucky, that the whole house could have blown at any minute. She told me, "Everything happens for a reason, you know," as if that explained any of it. I figured that if minor malfunctions indicate grander dysfunction, perhaps it would have been better had the thing just blown us to pieces, spared our suffering, by allowing my father to leave quickly in one swift, hot, incandescent clap, from hot air to ash and wild reckoning. Instead, the lawyer is coming next week. I've stopped talking to my shrink. It wasn't working. I told her everything in a single day, after which her therapy dog looked up at me and farted, and no one said anything. When I left, I couldn't stop laughing. So maybe the smaller malfunctions do signal some greater disaster, like the worrying of maladjustment that triggers depression or grief, the kind that can unhinge a person piece by piece until eventual combustion. Until that day, I hope I will be brave enough to accept these losses and sluice the seeping grief into joy. I'll forgive the aged tongue and the tainted syllables that seek a common name. I'll forgive the young for their haste and open my frightening hands that shake with death. Thank you. So instead of going from all the doozy, depressing poems, I'm going to give some reprieve in between. So they're not going to be all about my dad, okay? So we won't all feel depressed, okay? This is called If Beethoven Were a Chain-Smoking Schizophrenic. Yes. Okay? It's not about my dad. All right. It's hot, and the chain smoker around the block is wearing shorts and a bulky down coat that's electric blue. He whisks down Garden Street through smoke, walks into the cafe, and heads straight for the piano, as if the instrument is his woman and he's just seen her kissing another man. As he sits down upon the bench, his body relaxes. One finger tenses along a single black key, ready to wail the passion and divine madness of a schizophrenic talent. Watch the current in his body lash and break. Okay, so going in, thank you. So the first phase of the disease is really fun. It's kind of like being drunk all the time. You don't have a filter, so your jokes get a little funnier. You're more prone to play dress up in public and something maybe you wouldn't wear normally. It's pretty hilarious. But as you get into the next phases, it looks more like the ugliness of the other dementias where you can no longer wipe yourself, you don't want to take a shower, you start wearing the same thing every day, that sort of thing. So this next poem, Dementia in Bath Time Combat, is about all the fun times I had trying to give my dad a bath. Okay, Dementia in Bath Time Combat. Your body once belonged to a man immaculately groomed by brothers and beauties, ego, sun, and waves. Now your pale blue eyes are glassy, at once belligerent and benign, your clothes tossed aside with my trying hands. Your top lip stretches, wide and round as a child's inner tube. Arms are tense and sprung to flail. Vacancy is not the word for this blankness. Stillborn logic rots as the mind recedes, creating an unwanted face hinged on rolling madness that curves and conspires against reason. You are stubborn, indifferent to your own filth, the stench of you caked, and nothing will help but if I could, or she could, or someone could, get you lifted up from off that couch and into water. We might be able to help you preserve some dignity. Instead, you twist away like a fleshy sponge. With each attempted touch, you scold and lash to sting. Naughty girl, you say, as careful hands wash what you will not. Vacancy is not the word for this blankness that fills the space between our faces. Even so, I know I cannot leave you, even after you're clean. Thank you. Thanks. So, my dad is currently on hospice, but during the earlier parts of the disease when there was a lot more wrestling and not so much waiting, I distracted myself in very conventional ways. I dated a lot of losers to stay distracted. So this is about one of them, and this poem's called A Better Woman. And may I just add that he's not a loser. Okay, we're friends now. Since this is on the radio, he's not a loser, he's a good guy. It just was bad while we were dating. Okay, thank you. So this is A Better Woman. I listened to your poem about the porn star and feel like an asshole for hating it, and for suddenly seeing you as some innervated mechanism of our failing human species. Your mind, arms, and calves now seem narrow and cruel as a ruler that slaps a child's soft, pale bottom. Your humdrum criticism like fatty, generic slabs of brain-hanging baloney. I know, it's mean. In your room, I settle down into a plastic chair by the window, and the whole scene feels ugly. I know I must be starved for something as I sit through your monosyllabic perceptions and tour the stuffy, dank chambers of your errant misconceptions. You begin to describe me to myself, and I am startled to hear about someone manipulative and careless, someone pitiful, desperate, and self-indulgent, like a dog that chews itself until it bleeds. I scratch my ears. I've heard enough. I watch your needle spine sink back into the flat, hard couch where I used to let you stick your fishy tongue in my mouth. In other lives, I wonder how many times I've tried to kill you. But before your thin, angry mouth can chew off my arms, legs, cunt, face, before you can spit them out and rearrange all the parts so I'm something more palatable to taste, perhaps a little more friendly or complacent, maybe a little less opinionated and a bit more quiet, maybe a little more symmetrical, too. I'll raise the lid that covers the shit steam of life's golden platter and blow it in your face, because I'll be damned if I have to listen to another man give me just a few more friendly tips on how I might one day make a better woman for some lonely, feeble-hearted guy like you. Okay. All right. Okay, back to the depressing stuff. I mean, I guess I guess that was a little bit depressing in itself. Okay. So this poem I'm just going to call The Last. I see our lives strapped and set to follow something wide and shallow, like train tracks vanishing into the horizon. If I could wind back towards home, I might still be there, learning to love the burden, teaching myself to see past what's greater than this life or yours or that stretch of sand by water. If I could move faster than ideas that create and dissolve and calculate the rate at which life can flee from itself, I'd vouch for an infinite disappearance into the great divide, where everything is a reflection of something else, like the chambers of the heart, cell division, or divorce. In science, wiser betrayals form something vaster, like electricity, elements, or the brain's inherent madness. My father's eyes showcase a flickering ledge of brilliance. Lucidity crumbles beneath loss and diversion to form a man I no longer know. I recall his sharp cognition, a wit that tricked time. I count his luck by such marvels, functional as the hollow mechanism of his heart, pointed like the tip of a sword. I would have worshipped the capillary creaks of plasma and cells that flowed through body had I known what our blood carried. Father, the hemisphere of your mind is like wings wrecked by water. The weight of this loss is in knowing that though my blood is your blood, I cannot save you. All right, thanks. So since I'm making this a lot about my dad, just to give you some background information, some more of it, he was actually born and raised in Ventura, and his father was the deputy sheriff of Ventura County for many years. Yeah, so this kind of feels like a second home to me. I get the warm fuzzies when I come here. And then I remember my relatives, and I get a little apprehensive at the discussions we're going to have regarding my father, and the warm fuzziness dissipates slightly, but you know, not tonight. I'm getting the warm fuzzies. So, Thanksgiving's coming up. I have a poem about Thanksgiving and family, and it's called There's a Bazooka in My Laundry. Okay.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and it's starring the Sousa family, Diane and Charlie and Pete and their son Jackson. All right. So it's Thanksgiving, and my delirious father has gone to Oregon to be with his girlfriend, a woman who never knew the kind of man who was married to my mother, but loved the child he was before and the old man after. Junior high school sweethearts, My father won't stop talking about it. She never knew the man of habitual disasters, digressions, and teetering infidelities, the man who was as quick to rage as he was to love. But it's Thanksgiving. My mother is in San Francisco. She calls to tell me that it's raining there. I'm staying in town with my best friend Charlie, and we're spending the holiday at his parents' house, just like last year. So I'm sitting here in his parents' second-story sunroom thinking about family when I hear Charlie shout that there's a bazooka in his laundry. I look over at Charlie's mother, who's in the kitchen sweet-talking the turkey, and I stop to marvel at how its golden breasts seem to rise and swell with her praise. In the living room, Charlie is asking his dad about the bazooka, and Pete seems really annoyed as he methodically scrapes the arms of the living room chair for varnishing. A football game is on television. The bazooka is, of course, not really a bazooka. The front door is open, and the bay air makes it cold, but it smells really nice. Jackson, the youngest son, is also in the living room. He is 21 and beautiful. He wanders through the room like it's a mystic platform to his own universe. He's waiting for his girlfriend, who's even more beautiful, to appear so they can go meet her family. To prepare, he fixes his mustache in the mirror. She arrives and they disappear. The cat purrs privately on the couch. At 6 o'clock, dinner is ready. The turkey is bronzed and staged as a bodybuilder. Jackson and his girlfriend return. They huddle, clucking and cooing. Being no longer in love myself, I hate them. We've taken to calling them the kittens. Where are the kittens? Charlie's mother will say. The kittens are curled on the couch, we'll respond. Sometimes they're napping in the den. And on rare occasions, the kittens have gone on vacation. So I sit across from the kittens, who are now kissing, and so I look away to the opposite end of the table where Charlie is now singing and everyone else is drinking. I slide the spooky, unknown affairs of my father beneath the napkin beside my plate. I quietly pass on another helping of my mother's guilt and shame. Instead, I honor the better memories of my family, remembering when we were good and whole and loved each other. I raise my glass with hope that tonight they'll remember it too. Okay, I just have a few more poems in case you're getting bored. It's almost over. Okay, this one's called Hanging Up, and it's inspired by Michael Hannon's poem, My Mother Walked Out. Anyone in here read Michael Hannon? He's brilliant. Look up his book if you haven't. Okay, Hanging Up. When I moved back home, it was hard to sleep. I'd brought back a pile of weed from school, despite my better judgment, and smoked it liberally while listening to my parents bicker in the next room. When my parents weren't fighting, we sat together in trenches of silence so deep I couldn't see. The last time we went out to dinner as a family, my mother hardly ate anything. Instead, she feasted on empty plotted books and hardly looked up for 2 years. My father went off alone each day, the smoke rising up in him. I watched the disaster bloom, but I couldn't reach either of them. I walked into the kitchen late one morning. My mother put down her book. She said, "I can't stay here anymore. He's getting too crazy." When my father came home from work that afternoon, she was gone. It was then the house began to swallow me. My father drank brandy. He told the truth too late. He sat up naked watching TV. I couldn't take it. I put the dog down. I packed up the poems in my head. I kissed my mother's hollow face. I put on a mask. I walked away. I flew over oceans. I flew the coop. I rode over gravel and dust. I hid in water. I hid in sweat. I hid in everything as I tried to forget. I took a job up north. I sat alone in a barn. I watched a storm move over the farm. I heard someone scream. I called the police. I ran frightened across the yard. The porch doors shook open. A cat ran out and disappeared. I called home late in the night. I listened to my father, but he was barely there. I spoke to him through silent tears. He told me he was tired, that he was going to hang up. I told him I loved him. It wasn't enough. I flew across the states. I arrived too late. I stayed with my father for a little over 2 weeks. We drove to San Francisco. He wanted to go home, so he paced the parking lot. We had to call 911. They gave him the shot, and we drove through the night. His woman moved in, and I moved out. I drove 20 minutes to my mother's house. I went back to work. I signed up for school. I did everything I thought I was supposed to do. I worked and I wrote. I stayed close to home. I knocked quietly. I opened the door. I watched his eyes and I rubbed his back. He told me he loved me, but he needed to rest. I stayed in the room. I lay down beside him. I told him I loved him. It wasn't enough. Okay. This is called Considering Illogical Urges, and this is about one of my long-term distractions. I'd like to dedicate this poem to my good friend Charlie Rose. Considering Illogical Urges. I entered your house only 5 times. I was afraid to, because your father was a mean man, broken. The man spoke sideways, his words smoky and guttural, vulgar as Bukowski. Those lines were no more poetic, no more dulcet than a flushing toilet. I remember once, as we walked through the kitchen, he'd looked up at you from the kitchen counter and said, "Hey, you piece of shit, what the hell are you doing?" Your composed response was equally degrading. "Well, you ugly motherfucker," you began, and so on. My family had less obvious ways of hurting each other. Still, it was no mystery to me why you and I didn't yet know how to love. The last time I came over to his house, or to your house, your dad was out of town, and you'd led me upstairs to a dark room that seemed forbidden. I had always imagined your mother's ashes up there, somewhere high in a glass cabinet. But instead, there was a portable wooden sauna set up in the middle of the room like an outhouse in a desert. You'd stood there plainly, had taken off your clothes while saying, "I hope you don't mind if I..." Alas, I was too curious to object, but also too embarrassed. I couldn't have imagined a more unceremonious unveiling, like some customary preparation akin to salting a turkey. You slid everything off, so nonchalant, and I burned as each piece hit the floor, feeling as though you had stripped something from me. Not wanting to seem prude, I took off my dress, but I kept the rest on. Inside the sauna, your guitar was sweating. Everything was warped. It was so clear to me how well we had mastered the roles of our predecessors, the damage apparent in your congealed indifference and in my own illogical pursuit. Thank you. This is my last poem, Eating Carrots. About the same old, okay. Nowadays, eating carrots. Nowadays, when I watch my dad eat, I can't help but think about my skinny cousin Jimmy, who used to cry every time he was told that he couldn't leave the table until he finished eating all of his carrots. The carrots would just lie there like stiff, fat caterpillars, paralyzed beneath a thin film of white crust, as though they'd been cast off to die some cold, lonely death. I remember my cousin's face, burning with shame, blurring with mercurial tears as he lowered himself down over a pale stack of grayish orange. My dad and I used to always laugh at this, forgetting the absurd reoccurrence of tyranny that was being passed down through our generations like a sickness. My dad and I loved Cousin Jimmy, but his father, my Uncle Jim, could have been the long-lost son of Mao, Trump, or Lucifer. The man contained enough rage to start World War III. He was a man not unlike my grandfather. The man mapped the immaculate corners of his garage with silver and soap. He could count his children by the gathering of dust along the floor. So his children learned to carry it with them, and it wasn't so heavy at first. My father sits across the table from me now and smiles. His lips no longer hold the stress. His mouth is no longer marked by a satirical frame of mischief masking pain. His mind's deterioration has exposed a vulnerable sweetness, the kind that is innate, but sometimes buried by tyrant fathers who have spent years humiliating their sons. Memory becomes a blade, and time creates a shield. I turn the blade towards my father, but then I lay it down. Thank you.